Hola, Iglesia. Hello, church. Boy, we're so glad to be with you today. What a great day it is to worship God. Finally even warmed up today. That was kind of nice. Boy, I forgot to say Happy New Year. Do you know that Chinese New Year is just a couple days away? The only reason I know that is because we got to host the regional Chinese cultural celebration yesterday. Here's a picture of the lion dancers that were on this stage yesterday. It was this amazing thing. It was 5 hours of food and games and all kinds of cool stuff. There were like 300 or 400 people here yesterday. And I just want to know, I don't know if you know, God has blessed us with a season of hospitality. We've had the community band here. We've had the jazz, ETSU jazz band was here. A bunch of other things I'm forgetting have been here. It's what a great opportunity for ministry. And yesterday was none of those. My family and I, we were all here the whole day. I got to meet a lot of people, share the gospel, and talk about what's going on with our church. It was just really a blessed thing. So thank you for being that kind of place that's so hospitable with our facility. It was amazing yesterday. They did a great job cleaning up too. I was impressed. It was really fun. We got a ton of stuff going on right now. I'm wearing red today to represent Love Month, which is officially kicked off this week. So if you haven't already, make sure you go down to the atrium, sign up to serve. We want to make a huge difference in our community in the month of February, and we want you to be a part of it. So don't miss your chance to serve as part of Love Month. Also, of course, we're continuing this New Testament in a Year project, 5 chapters a week to make it all the way through the Bible in a year. We're up to Matthew chapter 25. This last week, if you were reading along, we did Matthew 21 through 25. Next week, Matthew 26 through Mark chapter 2. We finally get to a new book. Speaking of new book, last week I had somebody say to me, "Oh, Ethan, I meant to do this reading thing, but I just haven't done it yet. I haven't started. Are we going to do this next year? Because I really want to do it." That's crazy. No, it is not too late. Just if you're looking for a good place to jump in and start, like if you want to, I don't like to start in the middle of the story. I get that. Great. Start with Mark. We're about to start a new book. Start with Mark chapter 1 this week. Read Mark chapter 1 and 2, and you'll just jump right in, and then you'll be with us. Remember, don't try to catch up. Just keep up, and let's read together, and then you'll read Matthew next year. So jump in and do this. Even if you haven't been doing it already, this is a great week to jump in because we're starting a new book this week. Also, I hope that on the way in, you got one of these little handouts, just a cool little reminder of how God blessed us in 2018. 2018 was a great year. God was generous to us ministerially with some new ministry opportunities that God has just really been blessing. God was generous to us as a church financially through your generosity. A lot of cool stuff. This just is the tip of the iceberg, but a little something just to celebrate what God is doing among us. So lots of cool stuff going on, but especially just remember, first week of Love Month, jump in, get signed up. All right. So we're working on Matthew, right? Oh, I forgot one more thing. Speaking of Matthew, just so you know, starting next week, our sermon series won't line up exactly with what we're reading. We're going to kind of do a topical series next. We'll line up again in the future. We're going to kind of go in and out all throughout the year. But don't worry, we will at least some way remind you of what you're reading. If you want a reading guide, we've got them back there. Go pick up one of these. We also have them printed out. So we're going to keep reading together, even though the sermons won't line up exactly every Sunday for the rest of the year. We'll kind of drift in and out. Okay. Matthew, that's where I was. Okay, so we started by noticing Matthew's attention to the kingship of Jesus. And then, having announced Jesus as the king, the new king brings a new law, a law intended for our blessing and not for our judgment. We then looked about how as Jesus moves through the world, he's constantly calling for people to give him their loyalty and allegiance, to follow him. And in fact, he teaches pretty directly that what we decide to do with Jesus is the most significant decision of our life. Last week, we looked at the people of God's kingdom, and we looked at a remarkable text in Matthew 18 that teaches that God's people are meant to be a community of mutual accountability. And when a brother or sister falls into sin, even though it's hard and it's scary and it's awkward, we are meant to go to them and call them back to the way of Christ. And we noticed in that text that though the process is a difficult one and can sometimes lead to hard and challenging conversations where we have to say, hey, listen, we think you are rebelling against Christ. We don't even think you're really part of this anymore. We notice that the process begins in love and it ends in love. And it's motivated by love. Never judgment, but always love. All the way through the process. It's fascinating. This week, we get to Matthew 21 through 25. Now, from my perspective, these 5 chapters are the most challenging in the Gospel of Matthew. If you read them last week, it wouldn't surprise me at all if several times you were reading it and you're like, okay, I don't think I fully get what's going on here. We've got controversies between Jesus and the Pharisees, many of which are about issues that we've never even heard of. So if you don't go back and figure out the history, you won't even know what they're fighting about. You've got Jesus marching in to the city, fulfilling all kinds of prophecies, but they might be prophecies you've never read, so you're not even sure what prophecies he's fulfilling and why everybody's getting so excited. You've got gathering intrigue. Half the people seem to think Jesus is the best thing ever, and half the people want to kill him. Of course, it's the half the people with the army that want to kill him, so spoiler alert, in next week's reading, he's going to die, okay, in case you didn't know, but that's what's about to happen. So it's just a really confusing 5 chapters here in the Gospel of Matthew. I wish I had time to kind of preach through and try and teach through all 5 chapters so we could understand all of it, but what I decided to do instead was just pick the one chapter that I thought was likely to be the most confusing for the most of us, and just preach through that and see if we can learn what Jesus is trying to teach us. So maybe if you've got your phone with you, you know how to pull up the Bible on that, or maybe you got one of those on paper, or there's one in the back of the pew, grab a Bible. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 24, and we're basically going to work through the whole chapter. You'll want to be able to follow along because it's a complicated teaching. Many of us, I think, just kind of gloss over it and ignore it and don't bother to do the work to learn what Jesus is trying to teach us. So we're going to try and do the work together. The setting for this text is Jesus and his disciples have been in the big city of Jerusalem. And like I say, it's been a hard week, and the disciples are trying to cheer Jesus up by letting him notice all the pretty buildings. And here's where we pick up. Matthew 24, verse 1, Jesus left the temple, was walking away, when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to all the buildings. Now again, I'm sympathetic with this. I've been in New York City a ton of times, but still, every time I go to New York City, first thing I do, when I step off the bus or step off the subway or whatever, and you get on the city, first thing I do is go like this. Because the buildings, they're just so big. I'm just not used to it. And that's what the disciples are doing too. These are country boys down, and apparently the buildings of downtown Jerusalem were spectacular. Herod's temple in particular was one of the wonders of the Roman world. Apparently, we have emperors describing the beauty and grandeur of this temple. Apparently it was amazing. And they call his attention. Look at all the buildings. Jesus is unimpressed. You see all these things? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Later, they're up on the Mount of Olives, and they come to him privately, because this leads to a question. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, it's a curious thing here. The disciples ask a 2-part question. When will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming? What's curious about it is we don't actually know if they know they're asking a 2-part question when they ask it. They may think that the destruction of the temple will be at the coming of Christ, that these are somehow one event. But either way, it is a 2-part question, and Jesus treats it that way. His answer begins by focusing on the second part of the question. What will be the sign of your coming? And at first, he doesn't tell them what will be the sign of his coming. He instead focuses on what will not be the sign of his coming. Here's what he says. Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah and will deceive many. You'll hear wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of the birth pains. This metaphor of birth pains is super useful to us. I haven't actually had a baby personally, but I know several people that have, and many of them have mentioned that it hurts. I mean, not a lot. It's sort of like a strong tickle, but it hurts. No, I'm just kidding. Apparently it hurts a lot. That's what I've been told. I've been told it hurts a lot. But here's the funny thing about birth pain, that again, I don't know this personally, but I've heard about this. The funny thing about it is, the distance between when the pain starts and when the baby arrives is almost entirely unpredictable. Some people go into labor and 45 minutes later, boom, there's a baby, it's on Instagram. Some people go into labor and 2 days later, they're like, where is the baby? Come on, And in fact, some people, they have what's called false labor, where they have the pain of birth that happens weeks and weeks before the baby comes. And you go, yeah, this is it, and the doctor's like, no, you're not, we're close. Oh, well, I sure feel close. You're not close. This is nothing. Well, it feels like something, you know what I'm saying? So this is the metaphor Jesus gives us. He says, yeah, false messiahs will arise. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. There'll be national intrigue. Nation will rise against nation. Kingdom will rise and fall. There'll be natural disasters. And all of this stuff gives you no information about when I'm coming back. We got to remember that. In fact, he goes on with a list of more things that give us no information about when he's coming back. You'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. You'll be hated by all the nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. False prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of an increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Persecution, hatred of the nation, division in the church, the increase of wickedness, all give us no information about when Jesus is coming back. Here he shifts gears. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and only then can the end come. Jesus begins his answer with a long list of things that don't help us predict his return. And then he interrupts. He's actually going to get back to that same theme in just a second, but he interrupts that theme with a little bit of instruction. While we wait, without being able to predict anything, we do have a job. Stand firm and bear witness to Christ. We have a job. Stand firm. This is why we as a church can never waver in our declaration that Christ is Lord. That's how we stand firm. And we can never waver in our commitment to be a missionary people. You see, that's what he calls the church to. While you wait, we're not allowed to hunker down and kind of stay in our little huddle hoping Jesus gets back soon because the world's so crazy. No, he says, while you wait, the gospel must be preached to the whole world, to every neighbor and every nation. This is our mandate until Christ comes back. And then he gets back to it with more things that don't predict his return. But this one's a little different because now he has a specific event that he's worried they will think means he's coming back right away. And he wants them to know it's not true. He says, so, when you see standing in the holy place, this is of the temple, the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. The phrase, let the reader understand, is Bible speak for let the preacher explain, okay? So this is a reference to the Old Testament book of Daniel that prophesied the desecration of the temple that happened under a Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes. And Jesus is saying that is going to happen again. The temple will be desecrated again. And he says, when that happens, here's his advice. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of their house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world till now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Now this is where he finally answers the first part of their question. Remember the part about when will the stones be torn down? That happened in AD 70. The Romans finally got tired of little Jewish rebellions, and they sent the armies to just destroy the Jewish people. They started with Jerusalem, and they utterly leveled the city. The order of the king, of the general, was to let no stone of the temple lie upon another. It was to be completely flattened. And that's exactly what they did, just as Jesus prophesied. And Jesus wants them to be aware of this event in advance, Because he's concerned that when this happens, they'll think, okay, I know Jesus said that a war couldn't help us predict the end times, but good grief, this has got to be it. But he wants them to know it isn't it. In fact, he goes on, at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Look, I'm telling you in advance. If anyone tells you, there he is out in the wilderness, don't go out. Or here he is in the inner room, do not believe it. Jesus is preparing them for a catastrophe that they will live to see. And he does have some advice. Run. When the temple falls, run. Because it's going to be bad in Judea. And it was. It was a slaughter. It was awful. When the temple falls, run. He has some advice, but he also, more importantly, says, but don't think that even something as dramatic as this can be used to predict my return. Geopolitical events cannot predict the return of Christ. He could not be clearer. But he still has a question to answer. What is the sign of his return? That's what they asked. And that's what he's going to tell them next. Verse 27. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, in the desert you can always find a carcass. You don't look down, you look up. The vultures will certainly gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Jesus' point is, you want to know what the sign is of my coming back? It will be the most dramatic event in the history of the universe. Then will appear, verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man. All the peoples on the earth, not one lone prophet who thinks they figured out all the secrets of the end times. Everybody will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and glory. He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Learn the lesson of the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. This is how you'll know I'm around the corner. It'll be the biggest thing that ever happened. Truly, I tell you, this generation, not biological generation in this sense, but this age of people, will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Jesus is asked a two-part question. When will the stones be torn down? And when will you return? And he gives a simple answer. Don't think you can predict my return by looking at world events. Even this one event you asked about, the one about the stones being torn down, even an event that big can't be used to predict my return. Because when I return, it will be completely obvious to everybody. And in case he hasn't been clear so far, he goes on and makes it pretty clear. About that day or hour, no one knows. Not the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. In the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, and one will be taken, and the other left. 2 women grinding at the mill, one taken, the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day or hour your Lord will come. But understand this. I mean, if the owner of the house knew at what time of night the thief would be coming, well, he would have kept watch, wouldn't he? And he wouldn't have let his house be broken into. So you also must always be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him. Now, I know it's a complicated text, and there are details in there maybe you've got questions about that I didn't have time to address. But at least 3 big lessons are really, really clear from this text. The first is that Jesus will return. Our King, who is now with the Father, will one day come back in mercy and justice to establish his reign permanently with his people. The second thing that's just super clear from this text is we cannot predict when that will happen. A little aside here. One of the weirdest things to me in life is just how clear Jesus is in this chapter, and yet still how many people throughout church history have pretended like they could predict when Jesus would return. I mean, it's all throughout church history. You've got people announcing, and people believe them. Here's the thing. This happened when I was a teenager. Some of you younger won't believe this, but those of you who are older, you remember this, and you'll vouch for me that this really happened. Okay, 1988, I was a teenager. A guy published a book that was entitled 88 Reasons That Jesus Will Come Back in 1988. Okay, again, Jesus has already told us if anyone does that, they are a liar and a false prophet. That's not my words, those are Jesus. But okay, he did it once. A bunch of people bought his book. Whatever. You got excited. I got excited. We all were excited. He published another book the next year. Anybody know what the title of that book was? Some of you remember, right? Even if you don't remember, some of you can guess. I know some of you are thinking, no, it can't be. It can't be. Yep. In the next year, he published a book, 89 Reasons That Jesus is going to Come Back in 1989. See, I'm so glad when I live, if I decide to publish a book like that, I only got to come up with like 18 reasons. So that's awesome. That's a much shorter book. I'm super excited about that. Or 19 now. Okay, I forgot what year we're in. 19 reasons. That's great. But no, sure enough. Now here's the crazy thing about that book. It's crazy to me that somebody would have the gall to write that second book after they wrote the first book. That's crazy. What's even crazier to me, though, is people bought it. That thing sold like it was a bestseller that year. How wrong do you have to be for people? What? Wow. No. Here's what's even crazier. In order to maximize sales, a book like that, you have to release on the market at the beginning of the year, right? You don't publish a book like that in November of 1989. He published it right at the beginning of 1989, which means he had to have written it in 1988, which means he didn't even believe the first book that he wrote. I don't even know what to do. But here's the thing. We can make fun of, those hillbillies back in 1988 when we didn't know any better, but this all happened again in 2012, right? There was that radio preacher down in Florida. I remember this was a huge deal, all over the news. May 12th or something like that, 2012, Jesus is coming back. People are selling their houses and whatever. I don't even know why they thought that was a good way to prepare for Jesus to come back, but whatever they did. So people going crazy. Jesus doesn't come back. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert for all these prediction stuff. He hasn't come back yet, okay? In case you missed that, that's part of the deal. Jesus did not come back. Okay, so anyways, so he misses it. It's not right. And you're thinking, okay, now's when you put up shop. You shut down your radio show. You have been embarrassed publicly. No. He gets on the radio the day after his failed prediction didn't happen, and he says, you remember this? I made a math error. It's not May. It's October. And people believed him. I don't even know what to do. It drives me crazy. Because, again, it's not just that he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. It's that Jesus told us. He gives us this long list. Wars, famines, earthquakes, nations, kingdoms, persecution, wickedness. All that stuff is going to happen. It's all false labor, and no doctor can use that information to predict when the baby's coming. And we can't use that information to predict when Jesus is going to return. So thing one, Jesus is coming back. Thing two, we can't predict when. And so the third thing he wants to teach us, this is the most important thing. We must stay ready and stay on mission until Christ comes back. The rest of this chapter and all of chapter 25, don't worry, we're not going to go through it all word for word, but you got to read it. It's 4 parables in a row that teach us how to wait for Jesus. They teach us how to wait. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a couple of them. The next one, verse 45. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he'll put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time. He begins to beat his fellow servants, to eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there'll be weeping, of gnashing of teeth. This is a harsh and dark parable, but the message is clear. If you want to be ready for the return of Christ, be doing the work God gave you to do. And I love the example here. Did you see what the job is? He has the job of making sure all the other servants get taken care of and get fed. Isn't that a beautiful job? And can you see how if he doesn't do that job, the whole kingdom of God suffers? And the master is like, dude, when I come back, I better find you working. And that's Jesus' message for us. How do we wait for the return of, since we can't predict the return of Christ, how do we wait for the return of Christ? Well, we wait for the return of Christ by being ready for them to return. Here's another one, just a little bit of this next one. Next parable, Matthew chapter 25. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, 5 were wise. The foolish one took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming. You can read the rest of the parable in Matthew chapter 25, but you already know, you can already figure out what's going to happen, right? The bridegroom didn't come as soon as they'd expected. And those who brought extra oil were ready to faithfully wait. And those who weren't ready. They had to go off and do some shopping to get some more oil. And they missed the bridegroom's return. Again, it's a dark parable, but it's a clear teaching from Jesus. How do we wait for Jesus? Now, thing 1, we wait for Jesus by doing the work he's given us. Thing 2, how do we wait for Jesus? By being prepared to be faithful for the long haul. Not just the short season, but the long season. To be prepared for the wait. That's the paradox of the return of Christ. When is Jesus coming back? Soon. How soon? I don't know. That's the paradox. We're ready for him to come now, but we're also ready to wait. The next parable, again, it's so wonderful. It's about 3 servants. Each are given gifts by their master, even are given part of the master's wealth. 2 take what they are given by their master and invest it and use it for God's good purpose. And 1, in fear, hides it and huddles up and does nothing good for the master. When the master returns, 2 are blessed and 1 is cursed. And the master says, even if you had just risked it on some investment, I would have been proud of you for trying something. But you just huddled in fear. How do we wait for Jesus? Jesus wants us to know how to wait. How do we wait? We wait by being bold in our work. Not huddled up and afraid, for we are servants of the King who wants to come back and find us trying something for his name and his glory. The last parable. Of the 4, it's probably the best known, although still none of these are super well-known parables. We call it the parable of the sheep and the goats. It's about a king who gathers the people and divides them into 2 groups. To one group, the king says this, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And then the righteous will answer, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was somebody else." Actually, that's not a quote. Here's what they say, but that's what they mean. They say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a foreigner or a stranger and invite you in, needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" I don't think we did any of that. And the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me." And then the king will turn to the goats and say something very similar, but just the opposite. "You saw me hungry. You saw me a foreigner. You saw me naked. You saw me in prison, and you did nothing." And they'll say the same. "When did we see you? If we'd seen you hungry, we would have done something. If we'd seen you homeless, we would have done something." And he says, whenever you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. You see, Jesus is teaching us how to wait. And he says this, "You wait for the return of your King by recognizing that your King is already present with you in the least of these all around you. If you want to wait well for me, recognize that you can already serve me even now while I am absent. You can serve me when you serve the poor and the stranger and the foreigner and the naked and the thirsty and the hungry around you. The paradox of our waiting is that even as we wait for our King to return, we already have the opportunity to serve our King as we serve the least of these around us. Not long after this conversation, those armies I spoke of earlier will come, and Jesus will be arrested and tortured and killed. He'll rise from the dead and soon ascend to the Father. Before all that happens, he wants his disciples to know three things. He wants them to know that he will return to reign over his people. He wants them to know that they do not need to look at the world events around them to predict his return. When he comes back, it'll be plenty obvious. And he wants them to know how to wait by standing firm in their faith and by staying diligent at the work that he left us to do, to be witnesses to all the nations and all our neighbors, to love and care for the church around us, and to serve the least of these. For when we serve the least of these, we serve the very King that we're waiting for. Let's pray. Gracious God, teach us to wait for Jesus as people who long to be ready and long to be on mission. Oh God, we thank you for your word. Even though sometimes we've got to work pretty hard to understand it, we thank you for your word that calls us to stand firm in our faith and stay diligent in our mission. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.